Great, thanks, Joey. And for folks who don't know me, I'm Brian Shoup. I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Natural Resources Council, and what that means today, just like all of our partners, is we work for Joey. And I want to add my comments to Paul, that for the past 10 years, Joey has really put not only her heart and soul into this conference, but into VECAN and into addressing climate change in Vermont, and she's really made VNRC look good, and I very much appreciate that, Joey. So I'm have the privilege of introducing our keynote, Gina McCarthy. To prepare for that, I went up to UVM last night, and I saw her give a presentation to a pretty good-sized audience, a little smaller than this, predominantly students. And I'll give you a little preview of what you're going to hear, because it's going to be very powerful. I had 3 takeaways. The first one was that she's really funny. And I've never met Scott Pruitt, but he seems like a pretty dour guy. And I can guarantee you, Gina is funnier than Scott Pruitt. Also, I've been very anxious for the last year about the bad news coming out of Washington about the Trump administration's total disregard for science, for dismantling the EPA and the important programs that safeguard our air and water pollution. And she convinced me that anxiety is very well deserved. It's things are going really poorly down there. It's really, really bad news. And the third takeaway is I've never been more optimistic in the past 11 months, 12 months than I am today after hearing her speak. And that's because of all of the work that you're doing is being replicated across the country in county government, in the county level, the local level, state level, and all of that is going to add up to changing the trajectory that we're on. And she really convinced me of that. So it's not only a little bit of a downer, but there's humor and there's optimism. I think we're going to hear today. So I'll give you just a little bit of background about Gina. She received a Bachelor of Arts in Social Anthropology from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, where she studied primitive cultures, and she pointed out that served her very well in D.C. She went on to receive a Master of Science in Environmental Health, Engineering, and Planning and Policy from Tufts, and she does identify as an engineer focused on addressing the threats to public health. Not necessarily an environmentalist, but as somebody who's really looking out for the public health, which really, when you think about it, is environmentalism and it is climate change. Her work has included advising 5 different Massachusetts governors, Republicans and Democrats, on public health and environmental issues in different capacities, and she served as the commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection. She joined EPA in 2009 as assistant administrator for the Office of Air and Radiation, and in 2013 she was appointed EPA administrator by President Obama, specifically to carry out his climate agenda. During her tenure at EPA, she worked to cut air pollution, protect water resources, reduce greenhouse gases, and strengthen chemical safety to better protect more Americans, especially the most vulnerable. And that's been a constant theme through her career, really a concern about the most vulnerable, who are typically the most threatened by various forms of pollution. And then perhaps most significantly to me and to us, in 2015 she signed the Clean Power Plan, which set the first ever national standards for reducing carbon emissions from existing power plants. And in many respects, that led directly to the Paris Climate Accord. This spring, she was appointed a professor of public health practice at Harvard's Kennedy School. And to our good fortune, she's been spending her time lately traveling around the country speaking out about the most important issue of our time, climate change. So I hope you'll all join me in giving an enthusiastic welcome to Gina McCarthy.
That was just an amazing introduction. I actually never knew anybody listened to what I said. It was like I gave a quiz and you got it all right, Brian. I'm really excited about it. Thank you, and thank you for all the work that you do. Joey, thank you. Thanks for asking me here and for all the work you do. And happy 10th anniversary to everybody. That's really, really cool. You look older than 10. I just want you to know that. You do look good, but you just look older. Paul, thank you. Where are you? For the beans. And for all the work you're doing for being married to Deb. It was one of your luckiest moments. That's what I figure. All right, so let's have a little bit of fun and talk about what's going on in D.C. and try our best to make fun of it so we won't be depressed. And then we'll spend quite a bit of time on question and answers because I have so many questions and so few answers. That would be really helpful. But it is really great to be here, and I apologize to anybody who has heard me speak before. You'll recognize some of the same humor, but that's just me. I think the same, and I've done it for a lot of times, and I see some like great old faces. Sorry, Scott, I didn't mean old in the pejorative way. And it's great to see you again. Scott and I actually worked in the New England Governors and Eastern Canadian Premiers issues like mercury, climate change. We had some fun together. And Chris, where are you? My Mercury man over there for so long. I want to thank you for all the work you do. But it's great to see familiar faces. But I know that, you know, and I can't help but acknowledge we live in like crazy ass times. And you can quote me on that. It seems to be something that everybody recognizes. It's a little difficult today. And I always tell everybody that when I wake up in the morning, I always wake up to my husband screaming at MSNBC. Just seems to be the way you wake up when you realize you're actually living in the nightmare that you hoped when you were asleep would go away in the morning. But it's still there. And I try to remember, I tell him, like, turn the TV off, you know, for a while. And let's just have a nice cup of coffee and settle into the day so that you can not be depressed all day long. But then, you know, and I try to always keep in mind something my mother always told me. She always said, don't waste a good worry on things you can't control. And it's an incredibly important thing that I say to myself just about 30 or 40 times a day. And my husband just said the same thing back at me when I called him this morning. I said, what happened with the tax bill? And he said, but Gina, you can't control it. I'm like, God damn it, I want to. But all right, I can't control it, so I'll keep moving along. And what I always do most about when I talk to crowds now is to just recognize that, yeah, we're living in a world of folks in D.C. who, you know, really seem to want to deny science in its entirety, not just climate change science. We live in a world where they seem to think that their vision for the future is to take us back to the past. In particular, anything the Obama administration did or thought of and at one time contemplated is apparently needs to go away. And it's discouraging that there's very limited vision of what we need to do in the future. And so I'm watching all these announcements, but you know, I keep telling people you cannot turn into a grumpy Gus. Or my children would say a Debbie Downer, with all due respect for Gus's and Debbies that are in the audience. We just cannot let ourselves go down that road, because guess what happens if you do? All the good things go away. Everybody sits around, and at night you just grab a gallon of ice cream and you watch the 7 years of Game of Thrones and call it quits. It's tempting. I tried it. But you can't keep doing that, right? So we really have to remember that we control our own world. The hell with everybody else. You people have to remember that you change the world, not the federal government. The federal government never had an idea on its own that wasn't thoroughly tested at the grassroots level, where you didn't successfully annoy the hell out of everybody until the state decided that they better do something. And then when states got really aggravating, regions decided to do things. Then when regions do things, the federal government goes, oh my God, I have this really brilliant idea. And it's exactly what the grassroots organization said when they first started. And if you don't think I speak from experience, I worked 11 years at the local level. I worked 20 years at the state level. And I worked 8 years at the federal level. I can guarantee you that nothing new came out of the federal government or the state government that we hadn't thought about or tested or thought, you know. So really, let's try not to let the world go crazy on ourselves, right? We control it. We have to keep our eyes on what the real world is doing and how we can keep doing what we've always been doing, which is to live in the real world, to pay attention to what science tells us. You know, I'm at Harvard School of Public Health now because people don't realize that everything I've ever done in my life is public health. I don't love birds and bunnies because they're cute. Well, I do actually. They are cute. But I love them because they're part of my world. If I don't have ecosystems and a healthy biodiversity, I don't have a world where I can grow up and where my children can grow up and have clean water and clean air and a healthy place to live. I am in New England. This is what we do. This is why we live here. Would you live anywhere else? In all honesty. So that when I hear the people in D.C. looking at me and thinking that I do birds and bunnies, I tell them I don't do polar bears either. I do public health and I do climate change because it is all about public health. So if you think you're dissing the environment and we're just some kind of tree huggers, you're wrong, because we're about your core values. We're about what you need to live well. We're about what you want for your children. So get over it and get with the program. That's what we have to say. Now, honestly, you know, one of my mother's favorite sayings was that we're going to hell in a handbasket. I think we are, but does anybody actually know what a handbasket is? Nobody, right? I've begun to realize that it's actually the destination, not how you get there, that's the issue. Ask us about everybody. But the issue is we're actually not. We're not going to hell in a handbasket or whatever that is. We actually have to step back every once in a while and stop watching the news and stop dwelling on things we can't control and just look at what's actually happening in the real world. Because I hate to tell you, but the Beltway in D.C. has never been the real world. So listening to constant reporting about that will make you think that you're not living in the same world that you're actually living in. So look outside. Look at your own families. Look at your own communities. Look at what is actually really happening in the world. Because we know that climate change is happening. I don't ever want to discuss whether or not it's real. I can see it with my own eyes, I can feel it, and I can talk to the scientists, only I never understand anything they're saying. Which is why I'm at the Harvard School of Public Health, because I'm trying to learn. Actually, I'm trying to teach them to speak English. Because they're all excited about just how certain everybody is that climate change is happening. But instead of saying that, they say things like, we are very, very certain that anthropologic emissions of greenhouse gases is what's significantly changing our climate. I'm like, what does that mean? Right? What does it mean? And they say, well, it's, you know, that's as clear as we can get in science. I said, well, okay, everybody else thinks that you're in some kind of a crapshoot because you said you're very certain or you're very, very certain, and now it's very, very, very. You need to just say what you know, guys. You know, let's all get together and speak in ways that people understand it. There are very few science facts. Science is all about theories and hypotheses and correlations. I don't care. Speak about it like I talk. So I tell them 3 things you need to say. Climate change is real. Man-made emissions are causing it, which is why women need to rule the world. You men are just clapping out of defense.
No, we believe it.
Oh, thank you.
We already do.
Well, then you are living in the real world. This is great. So that's great. But the simple fact of the matter is that President Obama said something which I thought was, many things which I thought were very compelling, but I'm prejudiced in that regard. But one of the most interesting things I think he said was to say that we're the first generation to feel the impacts of climate and the last to do something about it. And so you cannot sit around and let this administration in Washington stop you for one moment and think that whatever you do isn't important or won't make a difference or isn't exactly what we need to be doing in order to move this country forward and in order to address the most significant existential challenge of our time. Because you are the ones that are going to control the future, not somebody who denies the science or tries to play with the energy market to go backwards instead of the direction it is moving in today, because we are making progress and nobody should take that away from you. You should get up every morning and think that I am doing the work that I'm supposed to do. I am giving everything I can to my children and their future and their health, and you should be proud of it. And you should understand that you are doing the work that needs to be done at a time when the federal government is asleep. At times, frankly, I wish they would just go to sleep so that you could have a little peace and quiet and work as we always do in this country. Because I don't know whether they forgot or not, but I haven't. But we are a country of, by, and for the people. They work for us, so all we need to do is speak more loudly and make sure that we're running our country and not ceding it to somebody else because we're too tired to listen to it anymore. We will succeed. We have to succeed. There is no other choice moving forward. So I know that when you're reading things like, oh, the president is getting rid of the clean water rule, like nobody needs to have clean water anymore. Like it's not really a big deal that 55% of the rivers and streams in this country have no living ecosystem because we have polluted it with nutrients that are exceeding the capacity of those ecosystems in those stream miles from actually being healthy. I know you're seeing creepy things like PFOS and PFOA in your water systems. You're not the only state experiencing this wonderful new dynamic. We know, and I know, that EPA can't manage this because Congress has made it so difficult to do the science that we haven't added a single water contaminant in our regulatory arena since 1997. So I know that we need to take our country back. We can do everything possible at EPA, but we cannot let science be denied. We have to listen to it, and we have to do what the laws say, and we have to move forward to protect ourselves and our communities and our states if the federal government isn't interested in doing that. We know how to do this in New England. We know why it's important because we see that. We see the world we live in, and we know that if we did not have our natural resources, we would not be the strongest country in the world. No one would want to live here, and nobody is willing to turn the clock back in this country to see the LA that used to look like the Beijing of today. And so we can't turn our back on other countries either and think that we can just live in our own little bubble. We have to help them figure out a way to not have Beijing look like that, because that's not just local air pollution that's challenging their public health. It is carbon pollution that is challenging ours. And we need to figure this out together. But the great news is that while they've made all these announcements to roll back rules at EPA that we put in place to reduce carbon pollution, they have a couple of significant problems. One is you can't just do an executive order and trump a rule. It takes a rule to trump a rule. Get it? It means the public can speak. They held the only public meeting on their proposal to repeal the Clean Power Plan in West Virginia, thinking that that would be a way of shutting everybody up. Only 81% of the comments that were received at that hearing were in favor of keeping the Clean Power Plan. 81%. People didn't sit and eat a gallon of ice cream and watch Game of Thrones. They got out there and they did what they had to do and they had to speak. And the other interesting thing is that you've got an administration that thinks that the career staff at the agencies are public enemy number one. And guess what? If you don't have the lawyers and the technical people and the scientists and the policy people working for you to write your rules, you ain't going to write good ones. So we will be, if they decide that they don't want to go with the 81% and go with the 19%, then we will fight them in court and we will win. Because what we did in the Obama administration was follow the law, follow the science, do outreach, 4 hearings for 2.5+ years, going to every community we could go to engage the public, which is what you do in a democracy. And guess who wrote our rules? The scientists, the lawyers, the technical folks that know the law, know the science, and understood how to help us design it in a way that followed the energy system. And the last thing you need to remember is that when we're living in the real world, we have to remember that it's changing. You may be able to say I'm repealing the Clean Power Plan, which would really annoy me. Don't get me wrong, I do take it personally. However, the real world is moving towards a lower carbon future. The United States is moving towards renewable energy and energy efficiency because it's cheaper. And the added benefit is it actually keeps you safe and healthy. What terrible dilemma are we in when the future is better all around and cheaper? So this administration may want to do things that basically say, well, I'm going to mess around with the energy market and require you to have a certain amount of coal and a certain amount of nuclear because we think there's reliability problems that no one in the world who has expertise in this area sees. But guess what? Nobody wants to raise the cost of electricity to their consumers. When they announced the repeal, the proposal to repeal the Clean Power Plan, I was interested to read that both AEP and Southern, 2 of the most heavily invested utilities in coal in this country, some of the largest, actually 2 of the largest, they basically said it would make absolutely no difference in their investment strategy because they're moving to renewables and energy efficiency because the energy market is going in that direction. So we may have anxiety and worries, but if you keep your head in the real world, good things are happening. People care about these issues. We're still the same country we used to be, who doesn't want to go back to the 60s of black smoke spewing out of smokestacks and our rivers burning. We care about our clean air. We care about clean drinking water. We care about having healthy places and beautiful places to live and to recreate. Everybody does. Republicans and Democrats care about that. And I'm sick and tired of the partisan politics that all of a sudden says one's got to be over here and one's got to be over there. Teddy Roosevelt started the national park system. He'd be rolling over in his grave if he knew someone was trying to rethink those special places that we have protected for decades. Right? And you've got George H. Bush, who passed the 1990 Clean Air Act amendment, which is what we're actually using to regulate carbon pollution. It is the most successful public health statute that's ever been enacted. And guess who started the Environmental Protection Agency? Nixon. Richard Nixon. By far the best president we've ever had. Right? All right, he got one thing right. And if you look at transportation, right, transportation, now I know that it's hard to believe, but when you have the European Union deciding we are going to ban the internal combustion engine in 2040, I thought that was really cool. California told me they were going to do this. I laughed at them. I'm not laughing anymore. This is really, really cool. And you have China, who has the biggest market for cars in the world, right? They have invested heavily in some of the best electric vehicles, and they're going to start competing in Europe and the United States. And they have said they're thinking about banning the internal combustion engine. And as a result, Mary Barra, who's the CEO of GM, went to visit them to tell them how misguided they were. She had a hugely successful trip by coming back and saying, you know, maybe they have a point. And we're announcing 2 more electric vehicle models for GM. Well, there you have it, Mary, good job. Because she knows that the way they go is the way we have to go, or else they're going to be back where they were at the beginning of the Obama administration, building cars that people don't want to drive. So we are at a really historic moment in transition in our energy and transportation worlds. We need to grab it. Every state needs to see what you're doing to contemplate how to have really good RES standards and move forward, to continue to invest in Lake Champlain so that these harmful algal blooms won't continue to shut down drinking water systems in Toledo, Ohio, or show up and make your community not the place you want to live anymore. And we have to do what you're doing, which is to think about continuing with Reggie, lower that cap, think about driving transportation into a cap and trade system or a tax system, as is being discussed, and let's keep moving forward. We cannot let this administration discourage us from doing the work that we're doing. It, in fact, should invigorate us, and it is actually what's happening across the country. You have America's Pledge, where we did not show up in Paris. We were there in force. You know what? I wasn't there personally, so I don't want you to go back thinking I was. But there were people there from states, from cities, from businesses in the United States to raise their hand to other countries and say, you know, we may be the only country who says we ain't hanging out with the Paris Accord, but guess what? Only the President of the United States says that. The rest of us are all in. We have dozens of states. We have more than 200 cities. We have more than 1,500 businesses who have pledged to move forward on climate and set goals and set strategies to get there. So stop looking mopey. Stop thinking Vermont's the only one smart enough to get this. The rest of the world actually may be there as well, although not as good as you. Because they're doing exactly what you're doing. They're doing what my dad always told me to do as a kid when I was whining like hell, which I often used to do. I never do that now, as you can tell. He used to say to me, Gina, you got to pull up your big girl pants and do something. I said, oh, gosh, really? I'd rather whine. Well, what I'm telling you guys is you got to pull up your big girl pants or big boy pants or gender neutral and do something. And that's exactly what you're doing. Bravo to you. Thanks very much. I should be the one thanking you. Sheesh, yeesh. All right, so how are we going to do this?
Okay, so some people are submitting questions versus using this. Feel free to do that. Gina, if you want to take a couple questions from the audience, if people have
Okay.
questions.
Yep, stand up and yell it out loud.
I'm Henry with the Vermont Climate Union. I'd like to know if you support a ban on new fossil fuel infrastructure for Vermont or the rest of the country.
Oh, that's a really good. Well, I think that building infrastructure that lasts 20 years, if we don't have 20 years, is probably not a good thing.
Thank you.
Now, having said that, I think one of the most important things we need to do is to make, and this is coming from me, and I'm always honest with people. We have made tremendous progress in technology development that has allowed us to continue to make progress moving forward without asking people to personally sacrifice. I worry if anything we do turns that tide and doesn't give us an opportunity to invest the way we need to so that solutions move forward. It's really interesting. Climate change, I think a lot of people early on in the climate discussion was sort of invested in thinking that they'd shake people up and show them what a really bad future would look like. Only in my experience, and this is from my degree in anthropology, when you try to motivate people by fear, they stick their head in the ground and they deny. Fear causes you to do one thing, stand still or run backwards. And so you need to tell people not what they can't do, but how to move forward. You need to tell them what a future looks like when you actually invest in the things that are going to keep us healthy and our planet safe. That would be my only word of caution. If you take an action that shuts the lights off, I'm not going to support it. Because you need to continue to move forward. And I'm not suggesting that what you said would do that. I'm suggesting that at times you can put too much pressure on the system so that you can't build that extra cushion you need to continue to move forward while you're taking things away. So be careful. Motivate people with positive energy. Give them the way to actually deliver their energy cheaper and from renewables and efficiency, and you'll have everybody following you. The minute mistakes are made, people will stop and wonder what's going on. That's my only word of caution. Okay? Yes?
It seems like a lot of the trends in how we live, how we move, where we move, how we use energy over the last, I'd say few generations, have been based on growth, growing wealth. We've had more money to make choices. And a lot of the choices we made require a lot more energy. We are talking now about, we're all thinking about encouraging choices that use less energy and hopefully save people money. But what about the squeeze part? What about what people want to be able to afford? If I have enough money, I don't have to live in the village center. I can have a house somewhere else. I can live the rich people can have more of what they want. The poor people are stuck with what they can afford.
Can everybody hear? Okay. Well, I think one of the questions, there's a couple of dynamics in that, and let's just separate it out. Okay. One is that, when I say I don't want people to be able to have to sacrifice, let me moderate that a little bit or qualify it. You don't have a right to live in a way that's going to infringe on my right to live. That's what regulations are. I am a regulator and proud of it. What we're trying to do, what we're supposed to do in Washington with federal regulations is not to tell you how to live, but to make sure that the way you live isn't negatively impacting somebody else's pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. So I'm not regulating to take away your rights. I'm regulating for the common good and for the public's right to live well. And so there are two things embedded in your discussion. And one is, there was a time when for many, it still is here, that people feel unconstrained in the way they live. You see that more in the western part of the country than you do in the east, because we're a little bit more landlocked. And so when you have endless amounts of space, you don't care whether you recycle. I can put it so far out of my mind, or it's a challenge to make people think differently, as if there are limitations. And it's not wrong to make demands that people limit their behavior, and we did it with energy efficiency. We crossed that hurdle because there are many people that said, I have every right to be as inefficient as humanly possible. No, you don't. Not if there are natural resource constraints. And we had to fight like hell to get that into the energy system. I was one of those people fighting like hell, because I was helping to design the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, but I was working in Connecticut when they were going to build new power plants to service 8 to 10 hours of high demand in the ozone season. Oh, what a hell of a great idea that is. So I'm like, no, you won't. We'll do integrated resource planning. We're going to figure out the cheapest way to get there, because I was sure that energy efficiency would win every time. And I was at ISO New England demanding that they have demand response systems and auctions. So there are ways in which we can do it. And I'm not suggesting that we don't have every right to limit behavior for the public good. It's just you got to provide the solution to that. Now, the second embedded issue is rich people tend to think they can have everything they want, right? Because they're really not the ones most vulnerable. Well, that's also a government intervention area, because what I found at EPA was, for example, we did a great job at reducing air emissions by 70%, which is great. Harmful air emissions, pollution's down. But we have pockets that have been left behind. And we have no right to ignore the need for environmental justice communities to breathe the same clean air as the rest of us. And believe it or not, in the United States, we still have 120 million people who are living in areas that don't meet health-based standards. So it's not just small pockets, it's a lot of us. So you don't have every right in the world to build out the suburbs if we can't figure out how to manage ourselves more effectively to be able to maintain the natural resources that are limited so that everybody can be served equally. And I think we have every reason in the world. I just want you to think about the solutions and run towards those and design systems that incent those solutions. Incentives are great. Demands are hard. Okay? That was a really long answer. I'm so sorry. Do you have anything online that we should do?
Yes, there are a couple.
Yeah.
But if people have
One
questions too, we have mics. While Ian's getting back there, here's a question from online.
Is this mine?
That's yours.
Oh, good. I didn't want to be contaminated.
No, you're good. Here's a question from online. Please comment on the organizing usefulness of divesting stock portfolios from fossil fuels.
Oh, God, I talk to people because I spend time at Harvard now. I talk to a lot of the students that are involved in this, and they've been highly unsuccessful so far. A lot of it has been unsuccessful, but a lot of it has been enormously successful. So there are two strategies, I think. There's one in what don't you invest in, and the other is what do you invest in. And part of the great analysis that was done is that very often, if you can get people to invest in the right thing, you actually make more money today than investing in fossil fuels. That's what we have to make sure is true. And that's the analysis you need to bring to the table. So again, we're not asking them to sacrifice a university like that, to sacrifice money that could go to the kids for loans, but we need to show that that is simply not what's best for them or for our future. That's how I think it needs to be handled. Can I go back here now?
So first of all, I'm one of those scientists.
Oh God, I'm sorry, did I insult you?
No, I've actually had 10 years of re-education with educators teaching me how to speak English. So,
sounds good so far.
And local Vermonters to help me along the way. In terms of communication, so November 2016, I'm a polar scientist, I actually do the sea ice. The data on the EPA website is turned off.
Yeah, I know.
How do we get information to the public? We're changing jobs to stay in the loop, you name it. Where can we put the information so that the public gets it? We're sending stuff overseas to keep it safe right now. Where can we send the data? What resources at the federal level exist to keep the knowledge flowing? I was able to show my daughter, who showed her biology teacher in sophomore high school, where to find the workaround, because there's a mirror site in Chicago now.
That's right.
So, this is serious. Modern day book burning, could you please speak to that? And how do we eliminate that problem? Because that's a very dangerous, slippery slope, especially for a democracy. Thank you.
That's a good question. There are a couple of things that worry me way more than rollbacks that's going on in Washington, and one is the lack of transparency. The idea that I don't like the science because it's science that is going against what I went there to do, and I am going to wipe out the information and not make it available to people, which basically limits the way in which democracy works. Or I'm going to claim that whatever anybody says is fake, and that's hugely damaging to the democracy that we're all used to and I think want to keep. And nobody was more distressed than I was, but it was when they took all of the climate stuff down, under repair, right? Under repair, the website was under repair. Jeez. So it was difficult, and some of it has come back. But it was anticipated. There are folks that downloaded all of the information from EPA, and there are ways in which it can be accessed. They did put some stuff up, but there's a group called, are you involved with EDGI, EDGI? Look it up, EDGI. I can't remember what the acronym is, but it is scientists from across a number of universities that are looking at the website constantly, and they are working with different types of news outlets to explain what's been eliminated, what's come back, what's yet to come back, so that those issues can be made readily apparent. But the other thing I want to mention here, because it's distressing, and anyone can download that information. If states want to provide it directly, I think many of them do. So there's ways in which you can do this, but it is incredibly damaging to see the way that it's being handled. And do you know that the administrator at EPA now has a soundproof booth in his office? He is so afraid of his own staff or doing things that he knows are inappropriate. I don't know. But I think shoe phones are next. That's what I think. Doesn't it sound like 86 and 99? I mean, come on, seriously. But anyways, the other thing that I want you to just focus on a little bit is that the polling really shows that people understand that climate change is happening. When we spend so much time trying to deal with the issue in DC, we're wasting a lot of time when we need to just speak to the people who understand. Over 70%, now close to 75%, because they see things happening in Puerto Rico and Houston. They're not stupid. People understand this. It's odd what's happening today. They see the wildfires that are terrifying. And I remember being in Kansas, and half of the state was in drought, the other half was in floods. They realize that Syria is a result of a couple of droughts that happened for a number of years, and it just shifts migratory patterns of people, and all of a sudden you're dealing with challenges that are just unprecedented. You'll never get 100%. Well, the one thing we can't do is let this administration continue to talk about the climate science as if there is an ongoing debate, or spend our time trying to get the remaining 30. Because there are still, if you poll, 30 to 40% of the people that do not believe in evolution. I am not going back there. So scientists just need to keep telling us the facts they see, updating the data, and being sure that the majority of people in this country are listening to you. and do your best to keep talking. But I refuse to let this be the ongoing debate. There is no red team and blue team. There should be no scientists that allows this administration to act like it's of equal stature between climate believers and climate deniers. There's no such equity. Right? Okay. Okay, yes.
I heard that Moody's said they're going to downgrade any city that fails to prepare for climate change. I heard that last
That
night.
is quite an amazing thing. I have been hearing similar. I mean, that's when you get momentum that's unbelievable. Directly bring it into the into the economy, and things happen. I think you will be seeing more of that because they have a reason to do that. You know, one of the biggest things that I worry about and get just that bothers me a lot is the fact that they eliminated climate adaptation efforts. I think they may be bringing it back a little bit, but why wouldn't you at least allow EPA to share information on what cities and towns can do to protect themselves? Why wouldn't that be of value, no matter where you are? Whether you think it's, you know, some fluke of nature that we are where we are, or whether it's nature. Do you know what I mean? So anyways, it's bothersome. But when you do that, it's amazing. You know, one of the things I'm doing at Harvard now is I'm going to be running a center. And one of the things I just want to do is to try to personalize the issue of climate change by talking a lot more about public health implications, because I do think public health motivates people. And I want to get information not through the federal government, but directly to people. I think we need to think more about the power of you speaking to other human beings, and the power of you speaking to businesses and making demands. A lot of businesses are now looking not just at their own footprint, but their supply chain, because they know at some point in time, if they're not under pressure today, they will be. Because businesses know that the climate is changing. There's no joke there. They are well aware, and they can do a lot more. And if we start demanding it, I think they will do it. And that's one way to do it, is to really bring it right into the economic system in language that they understand. Anything else online?
No, I don't know if I'm doing this right. You have to, apologies, patience, because are people submitting questions? Because I'm not getting that in. Okay, I don't know.
There's another question over there.
Yeah, okay, yeah, there's more over here. I'm sorry, let me go here and then I'll be over there. Yep.
With the success that Richard Nixon brought with the
Success
invention
and
of the
Richard
EPA,
Nixon don't
of the
generally
EPA,
go together.
right?
Yep.
So we cleaned up the
Yep.
rivers, we cleaned up the air a lot, and people don't see that now. That's probably
right.
one of the reasons
That's
why
right.
we feel complacent. So I hear you talking about public health. That sounds great. What do you know that you can tell us, and
Yeah.
share and enlighten us?
Well, you know, I always found that really odd because what you say is absolutely right. One of the challenges that we face is everybody thinks they're being protected because they can't see things. Until they can't drink their water. Then they don't anymore. You know, and you don't want to wait for that, but there are significant environmental challenges that remain in this country. One of the things that I did very recently was I went to New York I didn't go to a Yankees game or anything, so don't stop worrying. I went to New York to announce a study by Lancet. It was funded, and it was a study of the impacts of pollution across the world. One of the reasons why I wanted to do that is this study was really cool. It only looked at calculating basically the public health damages from exposure to pollution in instances where it could really be calculated. So there were only 5 different areas they looked at. And they looked across the world, and they basically said that 9 million people die every year as a result of exposure to pollution. And they set the world up in 2 different ways. They basically said you've got the developing world, which looks a lot like we used to look in the 60s. And it was very easy to see the pollution. It was different than the pollution challenges that we are facing today. And so I went there to try to not only talk about that, but talk about the overlay of a changing climate on all those pollution indices, because they are going to get worse. And we can see they are going to get worse if we don't address this issue. And so when I was the administrator at EPA, I always stood up and told people the challenges that we're facing. And nobody seemed to listen. You know, people actually think, I've been in government all my life, and people still think that everything is fine because the government has protected them. And I can remember way back when I was doing mercury work with Chris and others, and we were doing remember when we did thermometer take-backs and those kinds of things? Well, I was doing it in Massachusetts, and we were taking back the glass thermometers and giving people a digital. And my sister-in-law said to me, at the dinner table, why are you doing all this? I said, well, because mercury is really dangerous. She said, Gina, it's ridiculous. Mercury cannot be as dangerous as you say, or the government wouldn't allow it to be in a glass thing. Seriously, to me, I'm like, I am the government. But that is sort of the attitude, right? So, you know, somehow the developed world has visible pollution, but the developing world has much more nuanced challenges. And we have to have the courage to talk about it. We have to recognize that we haven't introduced or regulated a new water contaminant at the federal level since 1997. Do you think we haven't found any? Do you think there aren't flame retardants in those chairs that you're sitting on that's impacting your children's thyroid capacity? You know, we have issues here, folks, but they're different, they're insidious. We just have to get together and talk more honestly about our challenges moving forward. And if you don't think water is a problem in this country, you're so mistaken. Because we are seeing pharmaceuticals in our water systems. We are seeing stuff like PFOS and PFOA that seem to be ubiquitous these days. We are relying on infrastructure in water and sewer systems that were done 100 years ago. You wouldn't look good if you were 100 years old. You'd have needed a facelift at some point in time. We have more than $600 billion in water infrastructure needs, water and wastewater, in this country over the next 20 years, and we're not investing anywhere near that. So we have challenges here, folks. We've done great, but to continue the progress moving forward, we not only have to be honest about those and start reinvesting again, but we also have to address the challenges that we're seeing that make that all the more difficult. So it's hard, but I think public health is the way to go. I think we got to talk about the health implications of this. I think that if I went to the developing world and I told them to be part of the climate solution, that if I lived there, I'd probably slap you upside your head. I'd say, I didn't create that problem. What, do you want me not to grow economically? I got to bring people out of poverty. Well, guess what? The biggest challenge to the environment is poverty. When you move people out of poverty and into the middle class, you actually give them a voice so they can demand the kind of cleanups that we demanded in this country. And so the challenge that we're facing is, I want all those many developing worlds that agreed to be part of the Paris Accord to design climate plans and strategies that deliver public health benefits first and carbon as the co-benefit. Because they're going to do exactly the same thing as if you ask them the other way around, only they're going to deliver benefits for themselves today that's going to be of benefit to all of us tomorrow. See? Then you actually get better at delivering these things. Why do you think China's engaged in climate change? Because of Beijing air quality. Why do you think they had a problem with Beijing air quality? Because EPA put an air quality monitor on the top of the embassy, and the staff started tweeting out the results, and then all of a sudden people said, oh my God, that doesn't match what the federal government's been telling me. I got a problem here, Houston. Well, you know what John Kerry and I did? We put the same kind of monitor in New Delhi. and the same kind of monitor in Jakarta. Go look up the data. It's still visible. You can still see it. And now all of a sudden India is spending more money than we are in developing solar at a faster pace. So things will change, folks. Just don't give up. Don't sit still, and don't be polite.
Gina,
Yes.
a question, well, two, besides the first one of, which is, will you run for president? Another question for you is, what roles do community organizations play in addressing climate change that are different from what federal organizations can provide?
Well, that's a really good question. I think the federal government does two things if it's working well. Wait a minute, I forgot the first one. I had two. What?
The president one. Are you going to run for president?
No. It does science. You cannot do science in a small way. The federal government is has the most remarkable human beings I have ever met in my life. And the 15,000 people at EPA I will hold nearest to my heart for my whole life. They are the best scientists and technical people. They would go anywhere at the drop of a dime to help anybody. They are so mission driven, and it's not different in any other one of the agencies. So you need a federal government to actually invest in science. It doesn't need to be delivered by the federal government, but it needs to be funded. We need to keep understanding our world. And the second thing that it does well is, make investments in technology. That's my biggest worry, is without the Clean Power Plan that brings you out 30 years, that we will lose the economic opportunity that investments provide. And the federal government has always been there to test new technologies through different programs and to support them until they were market ready and could compete for themselves. That's going to be a significant problem when you have China, who's investing more than $600 million over the next few years and going to be kicking our butt and actually benefiting economically as a result. The country that moves forward with clean energy and wins is going to be the strongest country in the world. That's why you need to invest. So that's the things that the federal government does that we can't live without. Everything else, it's you guys. You motivate, you spread the word, you identify the problems that are happening, you spread the word on what solutions they are. You, from the bottom up, demand things that turn into regulations and programs and policies. The rest is left up to all of us to motivate and engage and push. That's how democracies work. I'm very sorry. You're going to be busy.
Keep moving.
Keep moving, baby. Pull up your big boy pants.
Probably time for just one or two more questions.
Over here. Over here. These two have had their hands up for a while. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. So I'm wondering about, since the president is going tomorrow to Utah to cut back on the Bears Ears National Monument, and I'm wondering how you perceive this attack against national monuments and wilderness areas in relation to the climate change issue. It just feels like it hits in the gut, and Native Americans are affected and writing about it. I guess my question is, how do you see that in the long run with this kind of attack against those lands? Do you think that that's a long-term problem? Do you think it's just episodic? How do you weigh it in terms of this larger issue of climate? Thank you.
Well, it seems to me that the Department of the Interior, in their exercise to go around and relook at whether or not we need these places and how to use them and how much we charge the public to go in them, is a bit of an anomaly, shall I say, because that's generally not what their mission looks like, and they kind of like protected places and want people to be in them. I don't know. I can't tell you what the impact is going to be other than I think one of the most difficult parts of this is that this administration is challenging what's normal, what's expected. It's taking away certainty and making it uncertain. And that's why, I'm shocked by it, to be very honest with you, because every president has identified areas that have special national significance. And when they are protected, it is forever. And I think they've just told us that forever doesn't happen. That you cannot stop. You cannot fail to vote. You cannot fail to speak your mind. We had a glitch, and we're going to pay for the glitch. But one of the things that I fear more than anything is that every administration will feel obligated to rethink and redo over and over, which means we'll never make progress. And so I would love to see, honestly, some of the actions that this administration moves forward with rethought in the next administration, and hopefully you catch up. But the only problem that makes for me is that we end up just doing and redoing the same thing. And we have to be careful not to just go back to what used to be, but to always craft the redo with the future in mind. Think about how far we've progressed or not. Don't just redo things or take away things. Everybody might have a good idea about something. And we just can't get into that. But we now know that any nodding off in the democratic system can mean the undermining of democracy, and we just can't be asleep anymore. We were a bit complacent. But the good news is young people are really cool. I know people complain about them all the time. I'm one of them because I have 3 of them, and they're really obnoxious. But when they're not yours, you can see their value. And it's the best thing I did when I left DC was to go and hang out with young people. They're unbelievable. They are undeterred. The only thing they have is a very short window of understanding about the world we live in. And the reason why I'm hanging out with them is to say, I got a hell of a lot longer view, and if I'm not discouraged, you have no right to be. They actually think that every administration behaves like the Obama administration. I said, I don't think so. I don't think so. We've had, if you think about it on climate, we have had no federal action on climate other than investing in moving the science forward. They never ever did anything at the federal level other than deny it in the political arena. And so this is the first administration that's moved forward. And the Obama administration was the first to move forward. So kids need to understand that they did not create the anomaly with this administration. It was the other. It was the Obama administration. And so if you want that to be your future, you've got to work at it. And the most impressive part about young people today, and I say this because how many of you watched the Vietnam series? If you haven't watched the Vietnam series, please do. The music is great. Just might be a little prejudice there. But it is a gut-wrenching thing to watch. I learned so much that I didn't know living through it. But every time I turned it on, I didn't really want to watch it. Because it's just upsetting to relive that and to see all the mistakes that were made. But I thought we were the most socially conscious generation ever. This one is going to compete. You have every class you're in, every time you talk to them, social justice is up here. They are so invested in understanding the inequities of the world. You know why? Because they understand the world better than we did. On their computer, they can see what's happening in Syria. They can see what's happening to the world today in a way that we never had accessible to us, without a filter. And so they care. And they want the world to be a better place. And the only thing we need to do is tell them they can have it again. That whatever is happening in these few years is not going to define our future or define the strength of our democracy. It'll only happen if we let it. Thank you very much.